Dr. Shafti holds a PhD in management science from the University of Strathclyde, and Professor Shafti has a second PhD in theology from the University of Edinburgh, which extends his expertise beyond business studies, while also helping to enhance his thinking in teaching and research in management by adding synthesis to analysis. Currently, he is a famous Iranian researcher in Islamic and Quranic studies between English speakers generations.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, thank you for having me, and I'm sorry about the interruption. I don't know what happened with the internet signal here. An honest answer to the question raised in the Quran, Surah Hadid, verse number 16. Obviously, I'm going to show that verse so we all know what we are talking about. My talk is going to be very simple and straightforward. I'm going to introduce the verse to all of us, discuss what would be an honest answer among the direct addresses of the Quran, then discussing what would be an honest answer among the indirect addresses of the Quran, and then some conclusions. I need to say that although my talk is based on tafsir and interpretation, but the perspective that I'm taking is not a very tafsiri comment, tafsiri and interpretation perspective. I'm trying to look at this from a very pragmatic, practical perspective as a simple Muslim, not as somebody who is trying to do some research. As a simple Muslim, in fact, when I heard that it is Surah al-Hadid that we need to talk about, I read the whole chapter a number of times, and a number of interesting things came to mind that what could be done, and it's about the structure, about the message, about different aspects of it, different levels of messages. And I was sure that my very capable colleagues like Professor Samji and Dr. Islani and others will perfectly cover many of those aspects. And then I came to this verse. And when I read that verse, I started thinking, what really would be an answer to that verse for a Muslim today, for a believer today? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم يأن للذين آمنوا أن تخشع قلوبهم لذكر الله وما نزل من الحق ولا يكونوا كالذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبل فطال عليهم الأمد فقست قلوبهم وكثير منهم فاسقون. I chose a translation from Pickthall so that we don't have any debate about the translation. The only thing I did was that I replaced the word Allah with the word God, because I cannot understand why translation of the Quran needs to keep the word Allah. So translation goes like, is not the time ripe for the hearts of those who believe to submit to God's reminder and to the truth which is revealed, that they become not as those who received the scripture of old, but the terror was prolonged for them, and so their hearts were hardened, and many of them are evil livers. As I said, my approach is not a tafsir approach for this particular talk. So I don't want to go through the details of what actually fatala alayhim al-amad means. Does it mean that a long time passed for them, or does it mean that there was a long time between them and the prophet that they had, or does it mean that the warnings that was given to them, there was a long time between the warnings and the punishments, or a number of other tafasirs? I'm not going to talk about that part. The only part that I want to concentrate on from a very pragmatic perspective is this one. ألم يأن للذين آمنوا أن تخشع قلوبهم لذكر الله وما نزل من الحق. Is it not the time ripe for the hearts of those who believe to submit to God's reminder and to the truth which is revealed? What you see here is that this verse, this verse is not really a question, as we all know. I mean, this is not like the Almighty is really wondering, oh, I'm just asking, is it the time or is it not the time? We all know that's not the case. We know that this is really a sort of blaming the believers, that if you are real believers, why your hearts are not humbled, and why you're not doing the things that you should do, as you can see from the verses that comes after that. I think, sorry, this is a bit the verse is a bit jumbled, sorry, because I think I just read the translation. What is wrong with you that you do not believe in God and messenger. In my understanding, this strict verse that we see here, and this question that we all know, the being that has revealed that question, for that being, which is God, the answer should be yes, of course. I think the reason the question has been raised in this strong way, and it is not really a question, it is really like blaming the believers. And the fact that the rest of the chapter, as you saw, says that why don't you believe in God? Why not? In my understanding, this is because the question is addressing the direct addressees of the Quran for whom Itmam al-Hujjah was done. So now I need to explain what is Itmam al-Hujjah. First of all, what I mean by direct addressees of the Quran, I mean the same thing that the verse لِتُنْذِرَ أُمُّ الْقُرَى وَمَنْ حَوْلَهَا means. So people in Mecca and surrounding it. Basically people who were living at the time of the Prophet, and they were directly addressed by the Prophet, or at least by the immediate companions of the Prophet. People who were living at the era of revelation of the Quran in the same place that the Prophet was living. So I need to explain what I understand by Itmam al-Hujjah. There is a narrative of this concept of Itmam al-Hujjah, which if I want to translate that narrative, it goes like completing the reasons or evidence so that no doubts remain. Now, the time does not allow me, of course, to bring verses and to gradually get us to get that and understand that. Although, of course, I'm sure the audience know what I'm talking about, but we don't have time for me to go through verses and establish that concept. I do have writings about it, and there are writings about it by others as well, that if you like, in the question and answer, I can refer to some of them. So what I have done is just to give you the narrative, just to say this is the narrative. So the narrative is like this. One of the main missions of the messengers of Abrahamic religions is to warn their people against punishment in both this world and the hereafter. Inzar. The word munzir and inzar, so we have, as you know, we have plenty of it in the Quran, and there are many, many verses that says we send prophets to be munzir, to do inzar, to do warning. This warning is done by a very important vehicle, and that would be Itmam al-Hujjah, completing and clarifying the truth. لَأَلَّا يَكُونَ لِلنَّاسِ حُجَّةً بَعْدَ الرُّسُلِ. So the verse that says that رُسُلًا مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنذِرِينَ, we are sending these messengers that are giving good news, and they're warners. لَأَلَّا يَكُونَ لِلنَّاسِ حُجَّةً بَعْدَ الرُّسُلِ, so that for people after these messengers are coming, there won't remain any hujjah, any excuse. In this narrative, in my understanding, that this narrative is coming from, that verse that says لَأَلَّا يَكُونَ لِلنَّاسِ حُجَّةً, Nas there would mean the direct addressees of the messengers, not all human beings. As the result of Itmam al-Hujjah, according to the Quran, the truth will become crystal clear and fully separated from the false. Overall, no doubts remain. So that is what the Quran tells us. To be more, to elaborate a little bit more, you will read in the Quran that when it comes to mushrikeen, the polytheists, the Quran often refers to them and says that their heart is like stone. They don't understand, they don't see, they don't hear. When it comes to Ahl al-Kitab, people of the book, mostly in Medina, you see verses, there are many verses that say, وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ, you know this, you know the truth of this. The verse that says that the Prophet, or the Quran, depending how we interpret that, is you know that like your son. So this is pretty much established in the Quran, that with the coming of a messenger, Itmam al-Hujjah will be done. No excuses will remain. Overall, there can be individuals, but overall, nobody will say that, oh, I still have some doubts about this. Overall, everything is clear. There might be some individuals, but overall, everything is clear. And once everything is clear, the rejectors of the messengers will be punished in this world and in the hereafter. So that's why we read so many stories in the Quran. And of course, these stories primarily were sent for the very purpose of Itmam al-Hujjah, for the direct addresses of the Quran, so that they see what happened to people who did not support their messenger and they rejected. So the punishment will come for these people, worldly punishment, and there's also promise that there will be punishment in the hereafter as well. The important point to appreciate or not appreciate is that the above only apply to the direct addresses of the messengers. The reason I put or not appreciate is because one may reject that. One may say that no. The concept of Itmam al-Hujjah is of course there. Well, it is not just for the direct addresses, it's for all human beings. So the very fact that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came around 1400 years ago and he brought his Quran, that is Itmam al-Hujjah for all human beings in the world, and this is it. We need to just go it. Or at least it is Itmam al-Hujjah for all Muslims today. That will be an interesting perspective, and we can see what the consequences of that is. Or we can appreciate that it was only for the direct addresses. Now, there are some main evidence and arguments in Surah al-Hadid that support the above question and are clear for the direct addresses due to Itmam al-Hujjah. So we know, and some of my good colleagues and researchers have referred to some of these. So reminding about God's dominion, he sends prophets and books, the believers will go to heaven, word being unworthy, God being forgiving, God has everything written, God's twice reward for believers, people of the book have no power over God's grace, the Fazlullah. Now, what I'm trying to do now is to try to explain 7 differences between the era of Itmam al-Hujjah, when a messenger stays there, according to the Quran, and era after Itmam al-Hujjah, when the messenger is not there, according to what we see. So the left screen, where you see black and white, will show you what, according to the Quran, or based on the Quran, is happening in the era of Itmam al-Hujjah. The right column, where you see that gray row, and I will explain the gray and black and white, and under the gray row, you will see what seems to be happening just now. Or at least I can very humbly say, this is my observation for the right column. People may have different observations. So, number 1, the direct addressees will see how God and his prophet gradually or suddenly overpower the rejectors. كتب الله لأغلبن أنا ورسولي إن الله قوي عزيز. Mujadila, Surah 21. Well, after the era of Itmam al-Hujjah, now when I say after the era of Itmam al-Hujjah, think about now, think about today. Many indirect addressees do not see God's domination, unless, of course, they adopt a philosophical, mystical perspective. Yes, if you adopt a philosophical, mystical perspective, of course, like many of our great Orafa and mystics and philosophers, you will say that everything belongs to God and I can see it, and this is it. But just seeing what is happening, you won't see it as clear as the direct addressees will see. Many of the addressees today see the dominion to belong to the non-godly powers rather than the godly powers. Number 2, the direct addressees witness the messenger or those who have seen him. Obviously, you know what is the situation today. The indirect addressees, Muslims in particular, we are 14th century apart from the messenger, and we are bombarded by conflicting reports about him from both inside religion and outside religion. And as you know, there are also some arguments from outside religion. We know, you know, that we are not in agreement with those arguments. We think these are very weak arguments, but there are arguments that even question the very existence of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What kind of person was Prophet Muhammad? You know, what was important for him? What was the main thing in Islam that he wanted to be? If he was living today, let's say in Iran, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia, what would have been the main issue that he would have concern about? I'm sure many of us will come with many, many different answers to that. So the direct addressees never needed to even think about it because they were witnessing the Prophet firsthand. Number 3, the direct addressees see miracles and extraordinary things from their prophets or hear about it firsthand and can appreciate it. The indirect addressees have not seen those miracles, or those who have seen them. Muslims in particular, especially non-Arabs, are not sure what about the Quran is extraordinary. So, we have a number of verses in the Quran. وَإِن كُنتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِهِ. If you are doubtful about what we have sent to our servant, make a surah, make a chapter like that. My thinking is that the people, the direct addressees of the Quran, could fully understand that, and they could fully see the linguistic power of the Quran among the other aspects of the power of the Quran. That is not the case today. I mean, first of all, we all know that even many are Arab friends, they do not fully understand the Fusha Arabic, but then again, most proportion of the Muslims, most percentage of Muslims, as we know, are non-Arab people. They never actually understand the Quran. They understand the translation of the Quran. And again, I argue that even many of our Arab friends do not fully understand the Fusha Arabic of the Quran. How would they even start to think that, yeah, this seems to be a miracle in a way, unless it's just a matter of faith? Yes, it's a miracle because the Quran says that, and I have faith. But for people at the time of the Prophet, it was the other way around. And they believed that it was something extraordinary, and therefore that made them to believe that, yeah, this is miracle, and I have faith. Number 4, the direct addressees could enter an explicit dialogue with the messenger and with God through messengers. Through the messenger. The indirect addressees have no way to enter an explicit dialogue with the messenger of God, let alone God himself. Well, in the Quran, we have plenty of verses. Yes, alunaka. They are asking you this, they are asking you that. In fact, there were so many questions that there's a verse that says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, la tas'alu an ashya in tubda lakum tasu'ukum. Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 101. Oh, believers, do not ask so many questions that if you know the answer, it will put you in trouble. Well, today it's not the case. If I have a question, I need to go and ask that from Dr. Mehdi Asfani. I cannot ask it from Prophet Muhammad. And if I ask the same question from Dr. Samji, he may come up with another different answer. That certainly was not the case at the time of the Prophet. The language of the message of the messenger and its content match the language, the culture, and reference points of the direct addresses. Much of it addresses their immediate concerns and affairs. Inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyan la'allakum ta'qilun. Surah Yusuf. This is a very important verse. Inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyan. We are sending this Quran in Arabic. Why? لعلكم تعقلون, so that you can understand it and think about it. What would be the implication of that? Think about it. Many indirect addressees cannot understand the language of the message without a medium. And once understanding it and deciding which translation is reasonably correct, many find it is not in line with their culture, is not addressing their immediate matters of concerns and affairs. Number 6, the direct addressees had simpler and converging understanding of their religion. Again, I'm referring to the fact that the Prophet was with them, the door of revelation was open to them. I don't want to imply that among the companions of the Prophet, there was just one unique way of understanding Islam. I'm sure, it's not happening like that. We all know that. Of course, to the number of the companions of the Prophet, there were different interpretations of Islam. As we see, it happened immediately after the death of the Prophet. It showed itself. However, still, in comparison, they were in the position to ask the Prophet for clarifying things. They were in the position to ask for some revelation. comparison, it was a converging understanding that indirect addressees face more complex and divergent understanding of religion. The direct addressees were positively encouraged by looking up at the role models. Any bad examples were considered as either infidels or hypocrites, or those who were still strengthening their faith. Indirect addressees, like today, can easily be discouraged by finding it difficult to find many role models, and by seeing bad examples of those who profess faith so strongly. Okay, so in fact, there is an argument that those who believe, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا here, is not addressing all believers anyway. It is addressing only those who believed in the Prophet at his time in Arabia. The reason I'm saying there can be an argument, and I'm not going to say whether that argument is right or wrong, is this, for instance, that Allama Tabatabai explains in Al-Mizan, verse number 7, Surah Al-Baqarah, translation, wherever the word those who believe has been used in the Quran, it refers to the first and early Muslims, unless there is any reason to believe otherwise. This style of address was reserved for them as a protocol of honor. Now, if we accept the concept of Itmam al-Hujjah, then there will be some implications. And I'm going to go through this very quickly, and because of time, and if there was any questions, I can, of course, come back to them. Definition of kafir. So I think if you do not believe in this concept of Itmam al-Hujjah in the way that I tried to explain, then maybe we can call every non-Muslim to be kafir. But if we go with the understanding of Itmam al-Hujjah and the way that the word kafir is used in the Quran, then kafir would be the person who knows the truth, but decides not to go for it. Either that, or the person has such a blocked heart due to his own attitudes that he's not even open to hear the truth. Criteria for salvation in the hereafter. Okay, so in the Quran it says, the verse in Surah Qalam, I think, yes, that says, I think it's called something like this. I hope I read it right. That's people in Jahannam. Something say we were not among those who pray, and you can easily get from that, or you can interpret that people who do not pray among Muslims, perhaps the Quran says they go to Jahannam. But if you think about Itmam al-Hujjah, then you will go to understand that this was actually about the direct addresses of the Quran. That does not necessarily, these promises of hell does not necessarily apply to everybody. The warning about punishments, relationship with non-Muslims, like, you don't take them as friends, etc. Again, there's a huge difference. Non-Muslims at the time of the Prophet, Itmam al-Hujjah has been done, being friends with them, or in ordinary times. Treatment of apostasy, waging war against non-Muslims, jihad ibtidai, and others, which I'm going to skip for now for the sake of time, but I'm happy to get back to them. What is special about Surah al-Hadid with regard to the concept of Itmam al-Hujjah is the question itself, and the fact that, in my understanding, it's being based on the concept of Itmam al-Hujjah, referring to evidence and incentives for recognizing and staying with the truth. The evidence and incentives have potential to work for all the addresses of the Quran, but in different ways. So I hope I do not make this misunderstanding, that I'm saying that all this evidence and reasoning that we see in Surah al-Hadid and other places in the Quran is useless at our time. No, not at all. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that for the direct addresses of the Quran, these were obvious. These were something that they could see in practice. At our time, it is not that obvious. It is something that people need to work on it. People need to work on their understanding and on their heart in order to fully get that. From a purely artistic perspective, Surah al-Hadid is like allowing you to look at the past, showing you how black and white the situation was at the time of the Prophet, then playing with our emotions so that we long for the same strength of faith despite living in a gray situation, and to behave accordingly. So this Black and white and gray that I put there is because of this. During the Itmam al-Hujjah, black and white, everything is separated, everything is clear. During our time, things are pretty much gray. Yeah, so an honest answer to question raised in Quran 57:16. For direct addresses, I think the answer is yes, Lord, of course. This should have been happened yesterday. So, أَلَمْ يَأْنَ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَنْ تَخْشَعَ قُلُوبُهُمْ لِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Is it not time ripe for the hearts of those who believe to submit to God's reminder? I think for the direct addresses, it would be yes, Lord, of course. It should have been happened yesterday. And in fact, the Quran has narrated that from them like this: رَبَّنَا إِنَّنَا سَمِعْنَا مُنَادِيًا يُنَادِي لِلْإِيمَانِ أَنْ آمِنُوا بِرَبِّكُمْ فَآمَنَّا رَبَّنَا فَاغْفِرْ لَنَا ذُنُوبَنَا وَكَفِّرْ عَنَّا سَيِّئَاتِنَا وَتَوَفَّنَا مَعَ الْأَبْرَارِ. But for indirect addresses, now, of course, I'm not representative of anybody, but I can guess and think based on my observations, based on what is happening today in many places, in many Muslim countries, in particular in my beloved country, Iran, in particular these days. I think that for the indirect addresses, it depends on individuals. I'm sure many will say, yes, sure. Many will say, yes, sure. Some may say, I'm working on it. Some may say, not yet. Some may say, actually, I'm revising my faith. And those who will say that, I don't think we can easily say that, oh, okay, so these are among the fasiqun, and these are among the ones whose heart has been hardened. Why? Because these people, today, we don't have Itmam al-Hujjah, and the truth and false are not separated the way that it used to be separate at the time of the messengers of God, including our own messenger. This is us. This is me. Thank you very much. Wassalam.